I never thought one silly kiss at a party would matter. Just a moment of feeling wanted, feeling alive again after months of being ignored by my own husband. But now, sitting here with this thick envelope of legal papers in my trembling hands, I realize nothing will ever be the same. Maybe that security camera saw more than I thought it did. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The Brooks' backyard party was supposed to be fun, a rare night out where I could actually feel like myself instead of just Nate's wife or the kid's mom. I'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing a dress that made me feel attractive for the first time in months. When we arrived, Nate immediately gravitated toward the corner, where the other husband stood nursing beers and discussing work, leaving me to fend for myself. "Aurelia, you look amazing." Julia Brooks rushed over with a wine glass already half empty, her cheeks flushed. "That dress is perfect on you." I smoothed the fabric self-consciously. "Thanks. I wasn't sure if it was too much for a backyard barbecue." "Are you kidding? Live a little." She glanced over at Nate, who was deep in conversation about server maintenance with two other IT guys. "Men, they're all the same, aren't they? The minute they get comfortable, they forget we exist." I forced a laugh, but her words stung because they felt so true. When had Nate stopped seeing me? When had I become invisible in my own marriage? Aurelia Vane looking stunning as always. Evan Brooks appeared beside us, his gym instructor physique filling out his polo shirt perfectly. His eyes lingered on me a beat too long, and I felt a flutter I hadn't experienced in years. "Evan, behave yourself," Julia swatted at her husband playfully. "You're embarrassing me." "Just appreciating beauty when I see it," he grinned, never taking his eyes off me. "Dance with me, Aurelia. The night's too young to waste standing around." I glanced toward Nate, but he was still absorbed in his conversation, completely oblivious to my existence. Linda, his mother, was watching from across the patio with her usual disapproving expression. She'd never liked me, always thought her precious son could do better. "I don't know," I started, but Evan was already taking my hand. "Come on, live a little. When's the last time you had fun?" The question hit harder than it should have. When was the last time I'd had fun? When was the last time I'd felt desired, appreciated, seen? Evan led me to the makeshift dance area, where a few other couples swayed to the music. His hands found my waist, and I let myself melt into the attention. "You're tense," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Nate's an idiot if he doesn't tell you how beautiful you are every day." "Things have been difficult," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. The wine was making me loose-tongued. "Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a ghost." "You deserve better than that." His hands tightened on my waist. "You deserve someone who sees you." The music shifted to something slower, and somehow we were pressed closer together. I caught my mother Miriam watching us from the kitchen window and saw her shake her head with a knowing smile. "Just relax, honey," she'd told me earlier when I'd complained about Nate's distance. "Everyone flirts a little at parties. It keeps the spark alive." "I should get back," I said half-heartedly, but I didn't move away. "Should you?" Evan's thumb traced a small circle on my hip. "Or should you do what makes you happy for once?" The words went straight to my head like another glass of wine. When had anyone last cared about my happiness? When had Nate last looked at me the way Evan was looking at me now? "Walk with me," Evan said softly. "Just for a minute, away from all the watching eyes." I knew I should say no. I knew I should go back to my husband, try to engage him in conversation, be the good wife I was supposed to be. But the wine, and the attention, and the months of feeling invisible made the decision for me. We slipped away from the main party area, walking toward the darker corner of the yard, where Julia's garden shed blocked us from view. The music was softer here, the laughter more distant. This is better, Evan said, turning to face me. Now I can tell you what I've been thinking all night. Evan, you're wasted on him, Aurelia. A woman like you should be worshipped, not ignored. His hands cupped my face, and I felt myself leaning into the touch. When was the last time Nate had touched me like this? When was the last time he'd looked at me with desire instead of obligation? We shouldn't, I whispered, but my body was betraying me, swaying closer to him. One kiss, he murmured, just to remind you what it feels like to be wanted. And then his lips were on mine, and for a moment I forgot everything. Forgot Nate, forgot the party, forgot that I was a wife and mother. I was just a woman being kissed by a man who wanted her, and it felt like coming alive after months of sleepwalking. The kiss deepened, and I let it happen. I let myself have this one moment of feeling desired, feeling alive. It was just a kiss. It didn't mean anything. It was just... click. The sound was so soft I almost missed it, but something made me pull away from Evan and glance over my shoulder. There, mounted on the corner of the house, was a small security camera. Its red light blinked steadily in the darkness, and my blood turned to ice. "Did you see that?" I whispered, but Evan was already stepping back, running a hand through his hair. "See what?" But he was looking around nervously now, too. The camera's red light blinked again, like an electronic eye that had seen everything. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft sounds of our daughters sleeping in the back seat. Ella, 8 years old and too perceptive for her own good, had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit. Hannah, 5 and still believing the world was fundamentally good, was curled up with her thumb in her mouth, a habit she'd recently returned to. I kept stealing glances at Nate, but his face was unreadable in the dashboard light. His hands gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, and he hadn't said more than 3 words since we'd left the party. "The girls had fun," I said, trying to fill the oppressive silence. He didn't even look at me. "Julia's really outdone herself with the backyard renovation. Did you see the new deck?" "Nothing." "Nate, are you going to ignore me all night?" Finally, he glanced over, and something in his expression made my stomach clench. "I'm not ignoring you, Aurelia. I'm thinking." "About what?" "About whether the woman I married still exists, or if she's been completely replaced by someone I don't recognize." The words hit like a slap. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget. The accusation hung between us like a toxic cloud, and I felt my defenses rising. This was exactly the problem with our marriage: Nate's constant judgment, his inability to let me have even a moment of fun without making it into some moral failing. We carried the girls inside in silence, and I tucked them into their beds while Nate disappeared into his home office. By the time I changed into my pajamas and went looking for him, I was ready for a fight. I found him at his desk, laptop open, but he closed the screen the moment I walked in. "What are you doing?" "Work stuff." He didn't meet my eyes. "At 11 o'clock on a Saturday night?" "I have a project due Monday." It was a lie. I could always tell when Nate was lying because he got this little crease between his eyebrows and couldn't hold eye contact. But calling him out would only lead to another fight, and I was too exhausted for that. "I'm going to bed," I said. "I'll be up in a while." But when I woke up at 3 a.m., his side of the bed was still empty. The next morning, Nate was already gone when I got up. A note on the kitchen counter said he'd taken the girls to his mother's for lunch and would be back later. No invitation for me to join them. Linda had probably requested specifically that I not come. I spent the day cleaning house and trying not to think about the party, about Evan, about that stupid kiss that meant nothing. It was just a moment of weakness, a brief lapse in judgment. Every marriage had them. The important thing was that it was over and would never happen again. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How was the party, honey?" "Fine," I typed back. "The usual crowd." "Did you and Nate have fun together?" I stared at the question for a long time before responding. "Sure." But even as I sent the lie, I knew things were far from fine. When Nate returned with the girls that afternoon, he was even more distant than before. He helped Hannah with a puzzle while I made dinner, but he barely acknowledged my presence. Even worse, the girls seemed to sense the tension. Ella kept looking back and forth between us with worried eyes, and Hannah asked twice if Daddy was mad at her. "Daddy's not mad at anyone, sweetheart," I assured her, shooting a pointed look at Nate. "He's just tired." "Actually," Nate said quietly, "Daddy needs to talk to Mommy after dinner. Privately." My blood turned to ice, but I forced a smile for the girls. Of course, we can talk about anything. But I knew somehow that this conversation would change everything. Monday morning brought a new level of awkwardness. At the girls' school drop-off, Julia Brooks, who usually chatted with me for at least 10 minutes about everything from PTA gossip to weekend plans, barely made eye contact. "Morning, Julia," I said brightly as our daughters ran toward the playground. "Morning." She was already turning away, digging through her purse for something that clearly wasn't there. "How are you feeling after Saturday? That was quite a party." She finally looked at me, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Yes, it was. Listen, I need to run. Early meeting at work." She was gone before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with a growing sense of unease. At work, I tried to lose myself in spreadsheets and filing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When my boss, Mr. Henderson, called me into his office just before lunch, my heart started racing. "Aurelia, sit down. I wanted to check in with you about your home situation." "My home situation?" "I've heard some rumors, and I want you to know that if you need any support, any resources, the company has programs available." "What kind of rumors?" He shifted uncomfortably. "About your husband being controlling, possibly emotionally abusive. If you need help, if you need time off to handle legal matters, we can work something out." I stared at him, confused. "I never said Nate was abusive." "Well, no, not directly. But Linda from accounting mentioned that you'd confided in her about some marital difficulties, and she was concerned." Linda from accounting, who went to the same church as Nate's mother, who had probably heard an earful about my behavior at the party. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "Nate and I are working through some communication issues, but there's nothing abusive about our relationship. Of course. I just wanted you to know that support is available if you need it." But as I walked back to my desk, I realized what was happening. Nate's family was already spinning the narrative, painting me as the victim of an emotionally distant husband to explain away whatever they thought they knew about Saturday night. The irony was that they weren't entirely wrong. Nate had been distant, cold, emotionally unavailable for months, maybe even years. Was it any wonder that I'd responded to a little attention, a little appreciation? Was it my fault that my husband had stopped seeing me as a woman and started treating me like a piece of furniture? That evening, I called my mother. "Mom, I need to talk to someone." "What's wrong, honey?" "Nate and I had a fight. Well, not exactly a fight. He's just being strange." "Strange how?" "Paranoid, suspicious. He's acting like I've done something terrible when all I did was have a little fun at a party." There was a pause. "What kind of fun?" "Nothing serious. Just dancing, talking to people. But you know how Nate is. He gets jealous if I so much as smile at another man." "Oh, honey, men are just sensitive that way. Their egos are so fragile. Whatever happened, you just need to forgive and forget. Marriage is about compromise." "But what if he can't let it go? What if he keeps punishing me for something that wasn't even wrong?" "Then you remind him that you're a good wife and mother, and that everyone deserves to feel appreciated. If he can't see that, then maybe he needs to take a long look in the mirror." Her words made me feel better, more justified in my anger. I wasn't the problem here. Nate was. His coldness, his emotional distance, his inability to make me feel valued. That was what had created the situation in the first place. When I hung up, I felt stronger, more righteous. Whatever conversation Nate wanted to have, I was ready for it. But first, I needed to make sure there were no loose ends. I scrolled through my phone, looking for any texts between Evan and me that might be misinterpreted. There weren't many. Just a few innocent messages about the party, about meeting up to chat. I deleted them anyway. Better safe than sorry. As I was putting my phone away, it buzzed with a text from Nate. "We should talk after work tomorrow." My hands were shaking as I typed back, "Of course, we can work through whatever this is." But even as I sent the message, I had the sinking feeling that working through wasn't what Nate had in mind. Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. Every time someone looked at me sideways at work, I wondered what they'd heard. The paranoia was eating me alive, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. It was just a kiss. One stupid, meaningless kiss that no one had even seen, except for that camera. I tried calling Evan during my lunch break, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I say? "Hey, just wanted to make sure we're on the same page about Saturday night being completely meaningless." That would only make things worse. At 3 p.m., Linda Vane called my office directly. "Aurelia, we need to talk." My mother-in-law's voice was ice cold, more formal than I'd ever heard it. In 10 years of marriage, Linda had never been warm toward me, but she'd at least been civil. "Of course, Linda. Is everything okay? Are the girls—" "The girls are fine. They're at my house and they'll be staying for dinner. You and Nathaniel need time to sort out this mess you've created." "What mess?" "Linda, I don't understand." "Don't." Her voice cut through my protest like a blade. "Don't lie to me, Aurelia. I've heard the rumors. I've seen how you've been acting. And more importantly, I know my son. Nathaniel doesn't get upset over nothing. Nate is upset because he's been looking for reasons to blame me for the problems in our marriage instead of examining his own behavior." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "Aurelia," Linda finally said, her voice deadly quiet, "I have known you for 10 years. I have watched you manipulate situations, twist words, and play the victim whenever you don't get your way. But this time, you've gone too far. I haven't done anything. Come clean. Whatever happened at that party, whatever you did, own up to it now before this gets any worse. My son is a good man who deserves better than lies." The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, hands shaking. How did she know? What exactly had she heard? And from whom? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of anxiety and mounting dread. By the time I got home, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. Nate was waiting in the living room, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. On the coffee table in front of him was a manila envelope, thick with papers. "Sit down, Aurelia." His voice was calm, controlled, and somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. "Nate, before you say anything, I want you to know that I love you. I love our family. Whatever problems we've been having, we can work through them." He picked up the envelope and held it out to me. "Look inside." With trembling fingers, I opened the clasp and pulled out the contents. The first thing I saw was a printout of a still image from a security camera. The timestamp read, Saturday, 9:47 p.m. The image showed 2 figures in a dark corner of a backyard, pressed close together, clearly kissing. The figures were unmistakably Evan and me. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "Julia sent it to me yesterday morning. Apparently, she reviews the security footage every week as part of their home insurance policy. She thought I should know what my wife was doing while I was 20 feet away talking to friends." I felt like I was going to be sick. "Nate, it's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like my wife kissing my friend at a party. What should it look like?" It was nothing. A stupid mistake. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You had 2 glasses of wine over 3 hours. I was watching." Of course he was watching. Nate noticed everything, filed it all away in that methodical brain of his. How had I forgotten that? It meant nothing, I said desperately. It was just a moment of stupidity. Evan was being flirty, I was feeling ignored, and it just happened. But it didn't mean anything. It meant everything, Aurelia. It meant that when you felt ignored, instead of talking to your husband, you decided to kiss his friend. It meant that you're capable of betraying our marriage, our family, our trust, over feeling ignored at a party. You have been ignoring me. For months, Nate. When was the last time you told me I looked nice? When was the last time you touched me like you actually wanted to? When was the last time you made me feel like I mattered to you? So this is my fault. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying there were problems in our marriage that led to this moment, and if we want to fix things, we need to address those problems. Nate was quiet for a long moment, studying the photograph. When he looked up, his eyes were cold. You're right, there were problems in our marriage. I've been distant, preoccupied with work, not as attentive as I should have been. But you know what, Aurelia? When I felt disconnected from you, I didn't kiss your best friend. I didn't betray our vows. I just tried to be a good father and provider while hoping things would get better. Nate, I'm not done. He pulled more papers from the envelope. After Julia sent me this, I did some thinking about other things that didn't quite add up, like why Evan stopped coming to our house for poker night, like why you started working late on Thursdays when you never had to before, like why you've been so defensive and angry lately. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What are you saying? I'm saying I pulled our phone records. I'm saying I recovered those deleted text messages from your phone backup. I'm saying this kiss wasn't a one-time moment of stupidity. It was the culmination of weeks of inappropriate communication with my friend. He spread the papers out on the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Text message printouts, phone logs, timestamps and dates that painted a picture I couldn't deny. 3 weeks of flirting. 3 weeks of complaining to him about me. 3 weeks of emotional affair before it became physical. I stared at the evidence, my own words staring back at me. Messages I'd thought were harmless, conversations I'd told myself were just friendship. But laid out like this, in black and white, they looked exactly like what they were: betrayal. I can explain. No. Nate's voice was final. No more explanations, no more excuses, no more gaslighting me into thinking this is somehow my fault for not being the perfect husband. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard, where our daughter's swing set stood empty in the fading light. I've retained a lawyer, Aurelia. I'm filing for separation, and depending on how you handle this, possibly divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow. You can't be serious. Over one kiss? Over 3 weeks of emotional affair? Over the kiss? Over the lying? Over sitting here right now and still trying to minimize and justify what you did, instead of taking responsibility for it? What about the girls? You're going to destroy their family over this? I'm going to protect them from growing up in a home where lying and betrayal are acceptable, where their mother teaches them that infidelity is just a mistake that doesn't count. Nate, please, I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry. It was wrong, all of it was wrong. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work on our marriage. Maybe we could have. If you'd come to me 3 weeks ago and said you were feeling disconnected and wanted to work on things. If you'd come home Saturday night and confessed what happened. If you'd taken responsibility at any point instead of making me the detective in my own marriage. He turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression that terrified me more than his anger: resignation. I'll be staying at a hotel for the next few days while we figure out logistics. The girls can stay here with you, but I want them every weekend, and I want us to tell them together. You're really going to do this? You're going to throw away 10 years of marriage? I'm not throwing it away, Aurelia. You already did that. The next morning, I woke up alone in our king-size bed, and the silence in the house was deafening. Nate had packed a bag and left while I was sleeping, and the girls were confused and clingy at breakfast. "Where's Daddy?" Hannah asked for the third time. "He had to travel for work, sweetheart. He'll be back soon." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. The look in Nate's eyes last night hadn't been the look of a man planning to come back. At work, the whispers followed me everywhere. Someone had talked. Maybe Linda, maybe Julia, maybe Evan himself. By lunch, I was sure everyone knew. The pitying looks, the way conversations stopped when I walked by, the sudden distance from colleagues who'd been friendly just days before. I called my mother during my lunch break. "Mum, I need help. Nate is talking about separation." "What? Over what?" "He found out about something that happened at the party. Something that wasn't even a big deal, but he's blowing it completely out of proportion." "What kind of something?" I told her about the kiss, about the text messages, about Nate's reaction. I explained how he was being unreasonable, how he was destroying our family over a moment of weakness. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished. "Men and their egos. He's hurt and he's lashing out, but he'll come around. You just need to give him time to cool off and then remind him what he'd be losing." "But what if he doesn't come around? What if he really files for divorce?" "Then you fight for your family. You get a good lawyer, you document his emotional neglect, and you make sure you get what you deserve. You've been a good wife and mother for 10 years. Don't let him punish you for one tiny mistake." Her words gave me strength, reminded me that I wasn't the only one at fault here. Nate bore responsibility too. His coldness, his emotional distance, his failure to make me feel valued, all of that had contributed to what happened, but even as I hung up feeling more justified, I couldn't shake the image of those text messages spread out on the coffee table. My own words, my own choices, laid bare in black and white. That evening, as I was helping the girls with homework, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Mediation, child custody arrangements, Friday 2 on p.m. My hand started shaking so badly I had to put the phone down. This was really happening. Nate wasn't just threatening, he was actually going through with it. "Mommy," Ella looked up from her math worksheet. "Are you okay? You look scared." I forced a smile and smoothed her hair. "I'm fine, baby, just tired. Why don't you finish up your homework and then we'll watch a movie together?" But as I helped my daughters with their evening routine, I couldn't stop thinking about that calendar reminder. Custody arrangements. The words made it real in a way that nothing else had. I was about to lose everything. Thursday morning, I made a decision. I needed to talk to Evan, to make sure we were on the same page about what had happened. If Nate was determined to destroy our marriage over one kiss, at least Evan and I could present a united front about how meaningless it had been. I called in sick to work and drove to the gym where Evan worked. I found him in the weight room, spotting a client on the bench press. "Evan, can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up and something flickered across his face. Surprise, guilt, maybe fear. "I'm with a client right now." "It's important." He glanced around the gym, then said something to his client about taking a 5-minute break. We walked to the empty yoga studio in the back. "Aurelia, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk about Saturday night." "There's nothing to talk about. It was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened, and it won't happen again." His words stung, even though they were exactly what I'd expected to hear. "Nate knows. Julia showed him the security footage." Evan went pale. "Shit. Julia knows too." "Of course Julia knows. She's the one who found it." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the small room. "This is a disaster. Julia's going to kill me. She's already been suspicious, asking questions about why I've been working late, why I've been distracted." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. What was I supposed to tell her? That I've been thinking about my best friend's wife? That I kissed her at a party like some kind of teenager?" "So you admit you've been thinking about me?" He stopped pacing and stared at me. "That's what you're focusing on right now? Aurelia, our marriages are falling apart." "My marriage was already falling apart. That's why this happened in the first place." "No, that's not..." Look, I take responsibility for my part in this. I was drunk, I was flirting, I initiated the kiss. But this isn't some grand romance, okay? It was a stupid mistake between two people who were feeling neglected by their spouses. Is that all it was to you? A mistake? What else could it be? We're both married with kids. We're friends with each other's spouses. Of course it was a mistake. His dismissal hurt more than I wanted to admit. For 3 weeks, I'd felt a connection with someone who saw me, appreciated me, made me feel alive. And to him, it was just a mistake. Fine, I said. But we need to get our stories straight. Nate is talking about custody arrangements, about divorce. If this goes to court... Court? Evan's voice cracked. Jesus, Aurelia, I can't have this come out in court. I could lose my job, my reputation. Julia would take the kids and move back to her mother's in Oregon. Then help me fix this. Talk to Nate. Tell him it meant nothing. Tell him it was just a moment of stupidity that we both regret. I can't talk to Nate. I can barely look at myself in the mirror. I betrayed my best friend, Aurelia, the guy who was best man at my wedding, who helped me move into my first house, who's been there for every major moment in my life, and I repaid him by kissing his wife. So that's it. You're just going to abandon me to deal with this alone? What did you expect? That we'd run away together? That we'd leave our spouses and kids for a relationship that started with cheating? The words hung in the air between us, ugly and true. When he put it like that, the whole thing sounded sordid and pathetic. I expected you to take some responsibility instead of acting like I seduced you. You pursued me, Evan. You flirted with me. You texted me. You told me I deserved better than Nate. And I was wrong. We were both wrong. But I'm not going to compound the mistake by lying to protect us. If Nate asks me directly, I'm going to tell him the truth and apologize. The truth? What truth? That it meant nothing? That it was just physical attraction and alcohol? Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to tell him. I stared at him, this man who'd made me feel beautiful and desired just days ago, and saw a stranger. A coward who was already distancing himself from what we'd shared, minimizing it to protect his own reputation. You know what, Evan? You're right. It was a mistake. The mistake was thinking you were worth risking my marriage for. I left him standing in that yoga studio and drove home, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd just made everything worse. That afternoon, I decided to try a different approach. I drove to the elementary school to pick up the girls, hoping to run into some of the other mothers, to gauge how much they knew and maybe do some damage control. But the moment I walked into the pickup area, I felt the shift in atmosphere. Conversation stopped. Eyes looked away. The usual cluster of mothers chatting by the playground dispersed like I was contagious. Julia Brooks was standing by the fence, talking to 2 other women. When she saw me approaching, she said something to her companions and started walking toward the parking lot. Julia, wait. I caught up with her by her car. We need to talk. She turned to face me, and her expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. I don't think we do. Please, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but do I? Do I have the right to be angry that my friend betrayed me? That she kissed my husband at a party in my own backyard? That she's been carrying on an emotional affair with him for weeks? It wasn't an affair. It was just... We were both feeling neglected, and we made a mistake. A mistake? Julia's voice was flat. You know what a mistake is, Aurelia? A mistake is forgetting to RSVP to a party invitation. A mistake is double booking yourself for lunch. A mistake is not 3 weeks of flirting with my husband, followed by kissing him at my party. I never meant for any of this to happen. But you did let it happen, over and over again. Every text message, every flirtatious conversation, every moment you chose to confide in my husband instead of your own. Those were choices, not mistakes. She opened her car door, clearly done with the conversation. Julia, please. Our daughters are friends. We've been friends for years. Don't let this destroy everything. She paused with one foot in the car and looked back at me. You already destroyed everything. The moment you decided that your feelings mattered more than your marriage, my marriage and our friendship, you destroyed everything. What about forgiveness? What about second chances? What about consequences? What about taking responsibility for your actions instead of expecting everyone else to clean up your mess? She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot while other parents watched from a distance. That evening, I tried calling Tyler, Nate's younger brother. If anyone could talk sense into Nate, it would be Tyler. They'd always been close, and Tyler had always liked me. "Hey, Aurelia." His voice was cautious, which wasn't like him at all. "Tyler, I need to talk to you about what's happening with Nate and me." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, just hear me out. Nate is talking about divorce over something that was completely blown out of proportion." "Blown out of proportion?" "Aurelia, I've seen the evidence. The text messages, the photos. How is that blown out of proportion?" "It was one kiss, one stupid, meaningless kiss that happened because I'd been drinking and feeling ignored by my husband." "It wasn't one kiss, though, was it? It was weeks of emotional cheating that led up to that kiss. And even now, you're still making excuses instead of taking responsibility." "I am taking responsibility. I admitted it was wrong. But Nate bears some responsibility too. He's been cold and distant for months. He stopped seeing me as a woman and started treating me like a roommate." There was a long pause. "You know what, Aurelia? Maybe Nate has been distant. Maybe he could have been a better husband. But when you felt disconnected from your marriage, you had choices. You could have talked to him. You could have suggested counseling. You could have worked on fixing things. Instead, you chose to seek validation from his best friend. So you're taking his side too?" "I'm not taking sides. I'm looking at the facts. And the facts are that my brother is a good man who's been betrayed by someone he trusted. If you want forgiveness, if you want a second chance, you need to start by admitting what you did wrong without trying to blame him for it." "I have admitted it was wrong." "No, you've admitted it was a mistake. There's a difference. A mistake implies it was accidental, unintentional. What you did was a series of deliberate choices that culminated in infidelity." The line went quiet, and I realized Tyler had hung up on me. I sat in my empty house that night, listening to the silence and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Just a week ago, I'd been a wife and mother with a normal life. Now I was facing divorce, custody battles, and the complete destruction of my social circle. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Julia. Don't contact me, my husband, or my family again. Any further communication will be considered harassment." Then another notification. I'd been removed from the school parents group chat, the neighborhood book club chat, and the weekend soccer mom group. One by one, the connections that had made up my social life were being severed. One by one, the people I'd considered friends were choosing sides, and none of them were choosing mine. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the calendar reminder for tomorrow's mediation. In less than 24 hours, I'd be sitting across from Nate and lawyers, discussing the dissolution of our marriage and the custody of our children. The house felt enormous and empty around me, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Not just the kiss, not just the flirting, but something deeper. Some fundamental miscalculation about what mattered, about what I was willing to risk, about what I thought I deserved. But it was too late for those thoughts now. Tomorrow I'd have to face the consequences of my choices, and I still had no idea how to make any of it right. Friday morning arrived grey and drizzling, which felt appropriate for what was about to be the worst day of my life. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain my side of things, how I would convince the mediator that Nate was overreacting. I dressed carefully in a navy blazer and modest blouse, professional but not cold, responsible but not severe. I wanted to look like a good mother, a woman who'd made a mistake but deserved forgiveness. The mediation office was in a sterile building downtown, all glass and chrome that reflected my nervous face back at me as I walked through the lobby. Nate was already there when I arrived, sitting in the waiting area with a man I didn't recognize, his lawyer, presumably. He looked up when I entered, and I was struck by how different he seemed, calmer somehow, more resolved. Aurelia. He stood up politely, like I was a business acquaintance rather than his wife of 10 years. Nate. I wanted to say more, to bridge the gap between us somehow, but his lawyer was watching, and I didn't want to say anything that could be used against me later. My own lawyer, Patricia Chen, arrived a few minutes later. I'd found her online, choosing her because her website emphasized protecting mothers' rights and fighting for fair custody arrangements. She was younger than I'd expected, with short black hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made her look serious and competent. Mrs. Vane, I'm Patricia Chen. Are you ready for this? I nodded, though I felt anything but ready. The mediation room was small and windowless, with a conference table that seemed too large for the space. The mediator, Mr. Davidson, was a thin man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice that somehow made everything feel more ominous. Let's begin with the basic facts, he said once we were all seated. Mr. Vane, you're seeking legal separation with the possibility of divorce, and you're requesting primary custody of your 2 minor children. Mrs. Vane, you're contesting the custody arrangement. Is that correct? Yes, Nate said simply. I'm not contesting custody exactly, I said quickly. I just think the children should remain in their family home with their primary caregiver, me. I'm willing to work out a generous visitation schedule with their father. Mr. Davidson made notes on his legal pad. Mr. Vane, can you explain the grounds for your separation request? Nate's lawyer, a silver-haired man named Robert Marsh, slid a folder across the table. My client has documented evidence of adultery, specifically a 3-week emotional affair that culminated in a physical encounter. We have text messages, phone records, and photographic evidence. My stomach dropped as Mr. Davidson opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. The security camera photo was right on top, and seeing it again made me feel sick all over again. Mrs. Vane, the mediator said gently, do you dispute the authenticity of this evidence? I looked at Patricia, who nodded slightly. We'd discussed this. Denying the evidence would only make me look dishonest. No, I don't dispute it, but I think it's important to understand the context. The context, Mr. Marsh interrupted, is that Mrs. Vane engaged in an extramarital affair with her husband's close friend, then lied about it when confronted. It wasn't an affair, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. It was a mistake, a moment of poor judgment that I deeply regret. A 3-week moment? Mr. Marsh pulled out more papers. These text messages span nearly a month, Mrs. Vane. Messages in which you complained about your husband to another man, shared intimate details about your marriage, and made plans to meet privately. Those weren't dates. We were just talking. I wish Nate could see me the way you do, Mr. Marsh read from one of the printouts. He's so cold lately, so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers that I'm a woman. Does that sound like casual conversation to you? Heat flooded my face. Hearing my own words read aloud in this sterile room made them sound so much worse than they had felt when I was typing them. I was venting to a friend about problems in my marriage. That's not adultery. I keep thinking about what you said at coffee yesterday, Mr. Marsh continued reading. About what I deserve, about how I shouldn't have to settle for being ignored. You make me feel alive again. Still just venting, Mrs. Vane. Objection, Patricia said. This is harassment, not mediation. I'm simply establishing a pattern of behavior, Mr. Marsh replied. Mrs. Vane wasn't just unfaithful physically. She was unfaithful emotionally for weeks beforehand. She shared intimate details about her marriage with another man, sought validation outside her marriage, and made her husband the villain in a story she was telling to justify her behavior. I wanted to disappear. Every word I'd written, every private thought I'd shared with Evan was being dissected and analysed like evidence in a criminal trial. Furthermore, Mr. Marsh continued, when confronted with evidence of her affair, Mrs. Vane's first instinct was not to apologise or take responsibility, but to blame her husband for being emotionally distant and to minimise her actions as just a kiss. Because it was just a kiss, I burst out. One kiss that lasted maybe 30 seconds. I didn't sleep with him. I didn't have an ongoing physical relationship. I made one mistake in 10 years of marriage, and my husband is trying to destroy our family over it. The room fell silent. Mr. Davidson made more notes, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Vane, he said finally, help me understand your perspective. You acknowledge that you engaged in inappropriate communication with another man and that you kissed him. But you feel that your husband's response, seeking separation, is disproportionate. Yes, I feel like I'm being punished far beyond what the crime deserves. I made a mistake. I've admitted it was wrong, and I've apologized. But Nate won't even consider counseling or working on our marriage. He's gone straight to lawyers and custody battles. And why do you think that is? I glanced at Nate, who was sitting quietly with his hands folded, letting his lawyer do most of the talking. He looked so calm, so sure of himself, and it made me angry. Because he's been looking for a reason to end our marriage for months. He's been cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. He stopped touching me, stopped talking to me about anything meaningful, stopped making me feel like I mattered to him. And when I finally reached out to someone who did make me feel valued, he used it as an excuse to blow up our entire life. So you're saying your husband bears responsibility for your infidelity? I'm saying that marriages don't exist in a vacuum. When one spouse becomes emotionally unavailable, it creates vulnerabilities that can lead to mistakes. Mr. Davidson turned to Nate. Mr. Vane, how do you respond to your wife's characterization of your marriage? For the first time since we'd sat down, Nate spoke directly. I acknowledge that I haven't been the perfect husband. I've been stressed about work, distracted, probably not as attentive as I should have been. But when I felt disconnected from Aurelia, I didn't seek intimacy with someone else. I didn't share private details about our marriage with another woman. I didn't kiss someone else and then lie about it. His voice was steady, matter of fact, which somehow made his words more devastating than if he'd been angry. I've been thinking a lot about our marriage over the past week, he continued. About whether I could have done things differently, whether I contributed to the problems between us. And the answer is yes. I could have been more attentive, more romantic, more emotionally available. But Aurelia's response to those problems was to betray our marriage. And even now, she's more focused on justifying her behavior than on taking responsibility for it. That's not true, I protested. I've said it was wrong. You've said it was a mistake. You've said it was meaningless. You've said it was my fault for being distant. But you haven't once said, I chose to betray my marriage vows, and that was wrong regardless of any problems we were having. The words hung in the air, and I realized he was right. Even in my own mind, I'd been framing the whole thing as a series of circumstances that had led to an inevitable outcome, rather than a series of choices I'd made. The fact is, Nate continued, I can't trust Aurelia anymore. Not with my heart, not with our marriage, and not with our children's emotional well-being. She's shown that when things get difficult, her solution is to seek validation elsewhere, and then blame me for driving her to it. Mr. Vane, Mr. Davidson said, are you completely opposed to attempting reconciliation? Marriage counseling, perhaps? I would have been open to counseling 3 weeks ago, when Aurelia was texting with Evan, but before she kissed him. I would have been open to it Saturday night if she'd come home and confessed what happened. I might even have been open to it Sunday morning if she'd taken responsibility, instead of making me the detective in my own marriage. But at this point, too much damage has been done. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Davidson, regardless of the marital issues, we need to focus on what's best for the children. Mrs. Vane has been the primary caregiver for 8- and 5-year-old daughters. She's been home for every sick day, every school event, every bedtime story. Removing them from their primary caregiver and their family home would be traumatic. Actually, Mr. Marsh said, sliding another folder across the table, let's talk about Mrs. Vane's fitness as a primary caregiver. My blood turned to ice. What's that supposed to mean? It means that over the past 3 weeks, while you were engaged in your emotional affair, you were distracted from your parental duties. Your 8-year-old daughter has been acting out at school, fighting with classmates, difficulty concentrating. Your 5-year-old has regressed to thumb-sucking and bedwetting. Both children have expressed confusion and anxiety about the tension at home. Kids pick up on stress, I said desperately. That doesn't mean I'm an unfit mother. It means that your choices have already negatively impacted your children's emotional well-being, and it raises questions about your judgment and priorities. Patricia was taking notes furiously, but I could see from her expression that things weren't going well. Furthermore, Mr. Marsh continued, Mrs. Vane has demonstrated a pattern of deception and manipulation. She's attempted to rewrite history to make herself the victim. She's tried to turn family members against Mr. Vane, and she's shown no genuine remorse for her actions. I have shown remorse. You've shown regret about getting caught. There's a difference. The mediation continued for another hour, but I could feel the tide turning against me with every exchange. Every time I tried to explain my side, it came out sounding like excuses. Every time I pointed out Nate's shortcomings as a husband, it made me look vindictive and unrepentant. When we finally took a break, Patricia pulled me into a small conference room down the hall. Aurelia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. This is not going well. I know it's not going well. They're making me sound like a monster. They're not making you sound like anything. They're presenting evidence of your choices and letting that evidence speak for itself. And right now, that evidence is telling a story of a woman who betrayed her marriage, lied about it, and is now trying to blame everyone but herself. So what do you suggest? I suggest you take responsibility. Full responsibility. Admit that you made serious errors in judgment, that you betrayed your husband's trust, and that you're genuinely sorry. Not just sorry you got caught, but sorry for the pain you've caused. And then what? Just let Nate take my children? Then we negotiate the best custody arrangement we can get, because right now, you're not in a position to demand anything. The evidence is overwhelming. Your husband has been methodical and reasonable in his approach, and you keep making yourself look worse every time you speak. When we returned to the mediation room, Mr. Davidson had clearly reached some conclusions. Based on the evidence presented and the testimony I've heard today, I'm prepared to make some preliminary recommendations, he said. Mr. Vane, your request for primary custody seems reasonable given the circumstances. Mrs. Vane, you would have visitation rights, perhaps alternating weekends and 1 evening per week to start. To start, I echoed. Custody arrangements can be modified if circumstances change. If you're able to demonstrate genuine rehabilitation, if you complete counseling, if you show a pattern of putting your children's needs first, then we could revisit the arrangement in 6 months or a year. I felt like I was drowning. What about the house? What about financial support? The house would likely remain with the primary custodial parent, Mr. Vane. As for support, given that you both work and the custody arrangement, there might not be significant spousal support, though child support would be calculated based on the standard guidelines. Everything was slipping away. My children, my home, my financial security, all of it disappearing because of one stupid kiss. Mrs. Vane, Mr. Davidson said gently, I want to be clear that none of this is set in stone. If you and your husband can work out an agreement between yourselves, if you can demonstrate genuine remorse and commitment to change, these recommendations could be modified. But based on what I've seen today, Mr. Vane has been the injured party, and his requests seem reasonable and measured. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, I felt completely defeated. Nate shook hands with the mediator and his lawyer, professional and composed. I could barely stand up straight. In the parking lot, I caught up with him by his car. "Nate, please, don't do this. Think about the girls. They need their mother." He turned to face me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. They do need their mother, Aurelia. They need a mother who puts their well-being first, who makes good choices, who shows them what integrity looks like. I hope someday you can be that mother again. I can be that mother now. I am that mother. I made one mistake. You made dozens of mistakes over the course of a month. And even now, you're still calling it one mistake, instead of taking responsibility for the full scope of what you did. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the grey drizzle, watching my life disappear into the distance. That evening, I sat in my empty house with a bottle of wine and the mediation paperwork spread across the kitchen table. The preliminary custody schedule was typed out in black and white. Alternating weekends, Wednesday evenings, 2 weeks in the summer. I was going from being a full-time mother to being a part-time visitor in my children's lives. My phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. The joint account had been frozen pending the legal proceedings. Another notification showed that Nate had filed a temporary restraining order, not for physical protection, but to prevent me from disposing of assets or interfering with his relationship with the children. I was trapped, financially dependent on a man who no longer trusted me, legally restricted from making major decisions about my own life, and socially isolated from everyone I'd once considered a friend. As I sat there in the silence, I finally understood what I'd lost. Not just a marriage, not just a kiss, not just a moment of feeling desired. I'd lost my family, my home, my future, and my reputation. I'd lost the trust of my children and the respect of my community. And the worst part was, I was only just beginning to understand that I'd lost it all through my own choices. 3 months later, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment across town, furnished with pieces from discount stores and whatever I'd been allowed to take from the house. The girls visited on alternating weekends and Wednesday evenings, and those visits had become a careful dance of trying to maintain normalcy while everything around us had changed. "Mommy, why can't we live with you and Daddy in the same house?" Hannah asked during one of our Wednesday dinners. She was picking at her chicken nuggets, the same meal I used to make for her in our real kitchen, in our real life. "Because sometimes grown-ups need to live in different places," I said, the explanation I'd rehearsed with the court-mandated therapist. "But that doesn't mean we love you any less." "Daddy says you made some bad choices," Ella said quietly. At 8, she was old enough to understand more than I wished she could. "He says that's why we can't all live together anymore." The word stung, even though I knew Nate was trying to be honest with them in an age-appropriate way. "Daddy's right. I did make some bad choices, but I'm working very hard to make better choices now." "Are you going to make good choices forever now?" Hannah asked, with the earnest hope of a 5-year-old. "I'm going to try my very best," I promised, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in months. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks ago. Nate had kept the house, primary custody, most of our mutual friends, and the respect of our families. I had visitation rights, a small apartment, and a growing understanding of how completely I destroyed my own life. The final hearing had been even worse than the mediation. Mr. Marsh had presented a timeline of my deception that was damning in its thoroughness. Text messages, deleted browser history, showing my searches for emotional affair and is flirting cheating, even my work computer logs showing I'd been online shopping and messaging Evan during office hours. "Mrs. Vane has shown a pattern of deception, manipulation, and poor judgment," he'd told the judge. Even when presented with clear evidence of her infidelity, her response has been to minimize, justify, and blame others. She has not demonstrated the kind of genuine remorse or behavioral change that would suggest she's capable of putting her children's needs first. My own lawyer had done her best, but there wasn't much she could say in my defense. The evidence was overwhelming, and my behavior during the proceedings hadn't helped my case. The judge had been fair but firm. Mrs. Vane, infidelity alone doesn't disqualify someone from being a parent. However, the pattern of deception and your continued inability to take full responsibility for your actions raises concerns about your judgment and priorities. The custody arrangement will remain as recommended by the mediator, with the possibility of modification if you can demonstrate sustained positive changes over the next year. Now, sitting in my small apartment with my daughters, I was finally beginning to understand what taking full responsibility actually meant. It wasn't just admitting that the kiss was wrong. It was acknowledging that I'd made a series of selfish choices that had prioritized my own immediate gratification over my family's well-being. I'd chosen to confide in Evan instead of talking to Nate about our problems. I'd chosen to seek validation from another man instead of working on my marriage. I'd chosen to kiss him instead of walking away. I'd chosen to lie when confronted instead of confessing. And I'd chosen to blame Nate instead of examining my own behavior. Each choice had seemed small at the time, justifiable, even inevitable. But strung together, they'd formed a chain of betrayal that had destroyed everything I claimed to value most. "Mummy," Ella's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you sad?" I looked at my daughter, Nate's eyes in my face, watching me with the careful concern of a child who'd learned that adults weren't as reliable as she'd once thought. "Sometimes I'm sad, sweetheart, but I'm also grateful that I get to spend time with you and Hannah, and I'm working hard to be the best mommy I can be." "Daddy's not sad anymore," Hannah announced. "He smiles a lot now, and Grandma Linda comes over to help with dinner and homework." The words were like a knife to my chest, but I forced myself to smile. "I'm glad Daddy's feeling better, and I'm glad Grandma Linda is helping take care of you." It was true, even though it hurt to admit. Nate did seem better, calmer, more at peace. When he dropped the girls off for visits, he was polite but distant, like I was a service provider rather than someone he'd once loved. But there was a lightness to him that hadn't been there during our final months of marriage, and I was beginning to understand that my behavior had been weighing on him far longer than I'd realized. Linda had been civil during custody exchanges, nothing more. She'd nod politely when I thanked her for watching the girls, but the warmth that had taken years to build between us was gone forever. I was no longer her daughter-in-law. I was just the woman who'd hurt her son. My own mother had been more supportive, but even she'd grown tired of my complaints and self-pity. "Honey," she'd said during our last phone call, "at some point you need to stop talking about what Nate did wrong and start focusing on what you're going to do right. You made your bed and now you have to lie in it. The question is whether you're going to spend the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself or whether you're going to figure out how to be better." The words had stung because they were true. I'd spent months focused on Nate's faults, on the unfairness of my situation, on how one mistake had cost me everything. But I was finally starting to understand that it hadn't been one mistake. It had been dozens of small betrayals that had culminated in a moment that destroyed my marriage. After I put the girls to bed in the small bedroom we'd decorated with their favorite stuffed animals and pictures from our old life, I sat down with the journal my court-mandated therapist had suggested I keep. "Write down your choices," Dr. Martinez had said. "Not your feelings, not your justifications, just the choices you made. Own them completely. Only then can you start making different ones." I opened the notebook and began to write. I chose to complain about my marriage to another man instead of talking to my husband about our problems. I chose to seek emotional intimacy with someone other than my spouse. I chose to delete text messages because I knew they were inappropriate. I chose to meet Evan for coffee without telling Nate. I chose to flirt with him even though I knew it was wrong. I chose to kiss him at the party. I chose to lie when Nate confronted me. I chose to blame Nate for my behavior instead of taking responsibility. I chose to minimize my actions instead of acknowledging their full impact. The list went on for pages, choice after choice after choice, each one seeming small and justifiable at the time, but together forming a pattern of betrayal that had destroyed my family. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole mess began. Genuine remorse. Not regret about getting caught, not anger about the consequences, but actual sorrow for the pain I'd caused people I claimed to love. I thought about Nate, who'd trusted me completely and had that trust shattered. I thought about our daughters, who'd lost the security of an intact family because their mother had prioritized her own desires over their well-being. I thought about Julia, who'd lost a friend and had to question her own husband's loyalty because of my actions. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't about fairness or proportional punishment or whether I deserved forgiveness. This was about consequences, the natural result of choices I'd made freely and repeatedly. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Nate or even Evan, but it was from Tyler, Nate's brother. Saw the girls at Mum's house today. They seem to be adjusting well. Ella mentioned you're in therapy. That's good. They need to see that you're working on yourself. It was the first communication I'd had from anyone in Nate's family since the divorce, and it wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was neutral, factual, maybe even slightly hopeful. I typed back, I am working on myself. I know I have a lot to make up for. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. My relationship with my daughters and any possibility of rebuilding trust with the people I'd hurt depended on sustained change, not just words. 6 months later, I was still in the same apartment, still seeing Dr. Martinez twice a week, still working at the same job where my colleagues had learned to treat me with polite professionalism rather than friendship. But something had shifted. The girls were thriving. Ella's grades had improved, and Hannah had stopped wetting the bed. They talked about their life with Nate with the easy confidence of children who felt secure and loved. When they stayed with me, our time together was precious and intentional, rather than routine and taken for granted. "Mummy," Hannah said during one of our weekend visits, "Daddy says you're working really hard to be better." "I am, sweetheart, every day. He says maybe someday we can all be friends again. Not married, but friends." The words brought tears to my eyes. Not because I harbored any illusion of reconciling with Nate. That ship had sailed, and I'd been the one to sink it, but because it suggested he no longer saw me as an enemy. Maybe, with enough time and sustained change, I could earn back enough trust to co-parent effectively. Maybe my daughters could have two parents who respected each other, even if they couldn't be together. That evening, after I'd dropped the girls back at the house that used to be mine, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the warm light spilling from the windows. Nate was probably helping with homework or reading bedtime stories, doing all the things I used to take for granted. I'd lost that life through my own choices, and no amount of regret could bring it back. But I was finally learning to live with the consequences without drowning in self-pity or blame. My phone buzzed with a notification, the final divorce decree, stamped and official, confirming what I'd known for months. My marriage was over. My family as I'd known it was gone. The life I'd built over 10 years had been dismantled by my own hands. But as I drove back to my small apartment, I realized something had changed. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost or who was to blame or whether the punishment fit the crime. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the choices I would make, about the woman I wanted to become for my daughter's sake and my own. It was too late to undo the damage I'd caused, but it wasn't too late to stop causing more. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build on. Looking back now, I can see that the camera didn't miss anything. It captured exactly what happened. A woman making a choice that would cost her everything she claimed to value most. The real tragedy wasn't that I got caught. It was that I'd convinced myself the choice was justified in the first place. I thought one kiss didn't matter. I was wrong. It mattered to my husband, my children, my friends, and ultimately to me. Not because of the physical act itself, but because of what it represented, a willingness to prioritize my immediate desires over my deepest commitments. The camera saw the truth I'd been hiding from myself, and sometimes that's exactly what we need to finally start seeing clearly.